Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Good evening. My name is Malcolm McClendon. I am the public affairs for the Air Force, and for the purpose of this meeting this evening, I will be the facilitator. So I'm going to go ahead and get the meeting started. Hopefully, everybody was able to get some of the training and view some of the tutorials online to help you through some of the options and that we have here with this go-to webinar. So real quick, the next slide, please.
I would like to know if Kathy Wurtsmith is in now. She's asking me by text.
Yes, what's the question?
Yes.
Can you hear me? This is Kathy Wurtsmith. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
So, okay, so here the screen you're looking at is just a quick rundown about the audio and the questions. In the questions box, that's the one that we are going to leave open. So at the end of the meeting, this is where the public comments, public questions, this is where you would enter that. And then you will have 3 minutes to either make a comment or ask a question, or the other option would be to just write in the question, and then I, as a facilitator, would ask that. And again, that would be later on in the evening. Let's see, and then for during the meeting itself, when the presentation is going on, the RAB members, as we do in a live meeting, would you guys have the option to raise your hand and ask a question or make a comment on that presentation, just like we would in a normal meeting. So be mindful of that. Just make sure you raise your hand, and we will try to track that as best as possible. Let's see, what else? Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here's the agenda for this evening. Once again, just thank you. Please, I asked I asked for your all's to please forgive it. This is the first time we're conducting this type of meeting, especially myself. So if you have a question or something comes up, let us know after, or raise your hand, and we'll try to get it taken care of. So next slide, please. Here's the ground rules. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so before we get, I'm sorry, can you back up a little bit? Okay, before we get into this, I'd like to introduce everyone. I was going to take the challenge of introducing everybody that's on the panel, which is the primary RAB members and the everybody, the government agency representatives. But I think if you guys could help me do that, let's just go down the list. I'm going to go ahead and, in other words, I'll introduce you. If I do it wrong, just let us know. So I want to start with the government agencies. Mr. Avi Musa, who is representing the MDHHS. We have Artie Lariche. He is a community RAB member and co-chair. We have Catherine Larave. She is a community RAB member. Kathy Wurtsmith is also a community RAB member. And then we have Mr., let's see here, going down the list. And again, forgive me if I skip someone. We got David Gibson. He is the he's the Air Force co-chair, and he is the new base environmental coordinator, replacing Mr. Matt for the Air Force. So maybe later on when the co-chairs speak, he could introduce himself. We have, see, going down the list, we have Mr. Jeff Moss, who's representing the Osable Township.
You missed me.
I'm sorry?
This is Daniel Stock. I was on the list. You missed me.
Okay. Sorry about that. Mr. Daniel Stock, he is a community member. Thank you. Going down the list here. Let's see. Who's next? Mr. Robert Taser, I see. There you go, community grab member, Robert Taser. We have Mr. Tim Cummings, who is representing the Oscoda Township. And we have Mr. William Gaines, who is a community rab member. I know I've missed somebody in here. Can you please let us know? Nope. All right. I missed Beth. Did I get you back there with the?
Yeah, Beth plays with the Eagles. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. I'm doing better. Doing better than I thought. Okay, good. I'd also like a special recognition to Mr. Eric Keller, who is representing the Senator Peters' office. And not sure if they are on or not yet, but we got Mr. We have a Congressman. Now I'm going to put you through. Sorry about that. Mr. Bennett, who is representing Mr. Sorry about this. Going to do multitask here. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so we got Mr. Bennett, he was representing Congressman Dan Kildee, and maybe at some point, Congressman Dan Kildee himself will also be in attendance. So that's who we have in attendance. And now let's move on to the stakeholder updates.
Excuse me, Denise Bryan, Health Officer, is present as well.
Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you, Denise.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, moving on to the stakeholder updates. So we're going to go ahead and, well, before we kick off, I'm going to introduce the co-chairs, Arnie, Lariche, and the Air Force co-chair, Dave Gibson. Do you guys have anything for the group at this moment?
As part of the update from Air Force, I was going to do a quick introduction of myself, but
Sure.
That's the only thing I've got right now.
Okay, this would be the time if you could introduce yourself to the group, please.
Okay. Dave Gibson, I'm a project manager with Air Force Civil Engineering Center. I've been with AFTEC over 10 years. I've retired military, bioenvironmental engineer. Been a project manager with AFTEC, working construction projects for vertical construction at Air Force bases, as well as fuels projects with Defense Logistics Agency. And I came over to the BRAC office here in January. With that, I can start the update for the Air Force. The next slide.
One moment, Dave. Anybody, whoever has the options to mute or unmute your microphones, if you're not actively speaking, can you please mute them? It seems like we're getting a little bit of feedback. But other than that, just I guess we'll press forward. Okay, go ahead, Dave. Next slide.
All right, the last RAB was in September 2019, and Matt and Dan were PMs prior to me. They've left since then, but there's quite a bit that's been accomplished since then. And if you look at the top of this slide, we're talking about at site SS57, the in-situ anaerobic biodegradation was installed. We've done 2 rounds of quarterly monitoring. I believe that was the 3rd or the 4th and the 5th rounds of quarterly drinking water monitoring. The ion exchange system was installed at the Mission Street plant, and the final ESI report has been released. Eagle has provided comments to us, and the responses to comments should be forthcoming within the week or so. Let's see, Mission Street ion exchange, there's 3 contaminants of concern, or they're actually on the SRD. That shows in the orange line the incoming concentration on average, and what you can see is for the three contaminants there, that the effluents are generally the non-detect range. We have in progress here, and I'm not sure why I have feedback. But the 5-year review report is going to be coming out shortly, and we'll be talking in more detail about the remedial investigation project. Do any of the board members have any questions on this information?
The insight by anaerobic biodegradation, I do not believe that we have heard about that in the past.
All right, then what I would propose is that we have that as one of the topics for the next RAB. If we have time at the end of this particular RAB, then I can cover some information quickly. But I'd like to take an action item to add that as a topic for the next RAB. Is that acceptable?
However it gets covered is fine by me. It's kind of up to Arnie.
Yeah, that'll work. This is Arnie. Did you talk about the flow rate versus the design that it's been operating at?
You're talking about for the SS57 system? Oh, mission. The flow rates are staying within the SRD requirements, yes.
So that's half of design, 100 gallons a minute. Thank you. That it's operating right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, we can go to the next slide, the next RAB members who want to speak.
Okay. Yeah, next slide. Okay, we will, anything from the U.S. Forest Service? Do we have, I don't think, was the U.S. Forest Service rep present? I didn't see him on the list. Anybody?
Jessica?
Yeah. No, I don't see them on here. Okay, we'll come back to that if they do show up. Eagle, if you have any comments, please.
I think we have Jessica now.
Oh, Jessica. Is Jessica Stuntbeck? Oh.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
We can now.
I know Ben Weiss was supposed to be on, and he was going to give the update because he's there locally.
Okay. Who did you say was supposed to give the update? I'm sorry.
I have Ben. He is here. Ben, can you turn your microphone?
He's on, but I don't see the audio an option for him.
Yeah, I don't see audio for Ben, unfortunately, Jessica.
Okay, let's we'll move forward. If he does, if I do see the option open up, I'll go back to him. Right now, if we can address, we'll jump to Eagle. Anybody from Eagle? Beth?
Hey there. This is Beth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Eagle has, since the last RAB, we've continued to review Air Force documents. We've completed our backlog of documents that we've had on the long-term monitoring report. And so those are, the systems report is a report that has been finalized out of those 3 reports. And then the long-term monitoring report and the pump and treat system report, those are still with Air Force now, and we're waiting for a response to comments. And those have been finalized within the, those comments have been given to Air Force within the last month. In addition to that, as Dave mentioned, We submitted our ESI comments to Air Force at the end of January. And my understanding is that the RAB members have those comments as well. We're waiting for the response to comments. In addition to that, our Bay City office has been conducting some quarterly sampling at select monitoring wells in the area, and they will continue doing that and sharing results on the MPAR page as they become available. In addition, Eagle has put a significant effort into communication, still running the monthly PFAS coordination calls with several of the stakeholders and having smaller meetings with the Now Community Group, in addition to a community meeting with some RAB members present recently. And some of those topics included our ESI comments, and then also the Wurtsmith Oscoda area conceptual site model for PFAS based on Eagle's understanding of the situation. Now we also have Mike Neller on the line to discuss the other topics of interaction that Eagle has requested from Air Force.
Yeah, this is Mike Neller. I'm the Remediation Redevelopment Director for Eagle. We did, after reviewing the ESI, we did submit a request for requesting interim actions, and they included there were 4 of them. One is the expansion of the capture field at FDO2. 2 was to take actions to prevent the migration of Van Etten Lake beach plume from migrating into, prevent the migration of the Van Etten Lake beach plumes, I'm sorry. Number 3 was to remove the source. There's a sludge pile or waste pond over there by the former wastewater treatment plant that is upgrading the Clark's Marsh that we think would make sense to just remove all that. And then we also support the ESI proposal to extend expand the Mission Street pump and treat system. So those are the 4 that we have requested move forward in parallel with the RI. And then the other item there is the dispute resolution status. There's been disputes on the books for over 2.5 years. There were, I think, 7 of them. 4 of them had been resolved, and 3, the resolution was predicated upon the completion of the ESI. After reviewing the ESI, we are in agreement that those disputes or questions have been answered, and so we will I'll be signing a letter here as soon as I can get back in the office to issue to the Air Force saying that we feel that all of the disputes have been resolved.
Okay, thank you. Is that for Eagle? Is that good?
Yes, thank
Unless
you.
there's questions.
Okay. Okay, any questions? Or I'll move on to the community RAB members. Anybody have an update for them?
Yes, I'll start, and I think there's going to be 1 or 2 more. The RAB has been work sessions about every other month, and we've attended conferences and seminars on remediation technologies, CERCLA process and schedules, and health and human risk assessments and screenings being done at other bases. We've also attended a number of seminars by the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, which is a DoD-sponsored program on ecological risk assessments and PFAS fate and transformation. And that applies to the foam at Van Etten Lake. We've had a lot of personnel changes that other people have talked about, and the teams are getting together, and coordination is starting to come back to a decent rate. We've had 6 new members added since at the last meeting, and we've got 3 out of our 4 teams functioning, internal teams, on various ways to review documents, communicate with the agencies and with the public. Future things that we're looking at, we need training, new members, and also technology and keeping up with new things that are CERCLA. Significant project that we want to highlight that we're looking into. One is the interim mitigation action and the timing of it. The attachment that was added on into our webinar from the Air Force, I think it's called a snapshot. It's got a table and a schedule. And we suggest that an Air Force document does recognize interim mitigation actions after the SI, but before the remedial investigation process. And we want to have a discussion about that. Human health risk assessment. There are other sites that have done screenings for human health, clams, deer, and we have not been able to get that moving forward at Wurtsmith, even though since 2012 there's been no do not eat. So anyone else from the community rab?
Kathy, did you have something? I believe Kathy Worcesterbarth asked to speak as well. Is that this is coming?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Oh, this is Kathy Worcesterbarth. I'd like to do an update from the NOW group. We have created what we consider a priority statement, and it is Need Our Water's top priority to have the Air Force stop the flow of Wurtsmith PFAS contaminations into all Scota area surface waters by no later than 2023, including remediation with the utmost speed and urgency of the PFAS plumes impacting Van Etten Lake. Tonight we're going, that's our priority statement that we'll move forward with. Tonight we're going to hear from the U.S. Air Force about a report that will tell us that their findings do not warrant immediate action for cleanup. For 10 years, that's how long the Air Force has been investigating this site. With the recent report from the Pentagon saying it may take decades to remove these toxic chemicals, we've already experienced 1 decade. As a reminder, these PFAS chemicals are bioaccumulating in our blood and are linked with cancer, hormone disruption, liver damage, and infertility. Even former EPA directors for the Office of Water say the Department of Defense timeline overestimates the needed time to complete certain steps, which is what we're in, the CERCLA process. In cases where the contamination is already known, like here at Wurtsmith, the DoD should be able to proceed more quickly. It should not take years to decide on a course of action. This is groundwater contamination and will need to be replicated site after site in the DoD. She says it's a foregone conclusion that the pump and treat system, like we have here at Wurtsmith, is the standardized remediation method. But as we are witnessing in this site and experiencing firsthand, the Air Force is implying that it's something different. As our community is saying, our health experts, our legislators, and our children, the DoD and the Air Force need to take aggressive measures to clean up the toxic chemicals. This approach to address only drinking water sources is short-sighted and only plays into this strategy to delay. What is being delayed is the inevitable contamination of the drinking water source, Lake Huron. Right now, everyone is learning about the importance of a healthy immune system with our current pandemic. Why should we accept the continual exposure to these substances we know weakens the immune system? We have partnered with you, the Air Force, in this process, and our community is showing a great deal of restraint and patience. As one voice of many similar voices, I am begging you to consider taking all necessary, possible, or what may be considered or viewed as the impossible steps to immediately cleaning up this site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other community RAB members? Okay, next slide, please.
Taser had a request.
Oh, Mr. Taser? Just FYI, you might be muted. Just go ahead and look at that. We were getting a lot of background noise, so we muted some people. So so if you're speaking, make sure you unmute yourself and then mute it back when you're not speaking. Thank you. You said Robert Taser, anything? Or is that for later in the meeting?
He's been muted again. Just 1 second. Bob, you should be able to talk now. Can you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
I'm going back and forth, muted, unmuted.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I think I can do this now. It has somewhat to deal with some of the procedures, but if you don't mind, I can do it now. 2 minutes?
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, RAB members and SCOTO community. I want to start out by saying thank you for the work that has been done to remediate the contamination in my community. Now, I would like to take a minute to try to express my disappointment in the Air Force and in our state agencies for excluding my community in those decisions that affect my community. Since the forming of the RAB, our first orientation meeting, I don't feel my community has had a direct impact into the Air Force has done towards remediation. Not once do I recall ever having a vote on anything other than selecting a co-chair or RAB procedures, which I will address in a second here. When the RAB was laid out to our community, I had high hopes that remediation of our community was based in protecting our health from the contaminations that the Air Force has left us. Since that time, I have lost faith that our health is the focus of remediation. I believe the focus now is not to make the Air Force look bad. My community is not being treated fairly. The Air Force has not allowed the procedures they agreed to. They haven't followed them. Section 2.2 frequency states the Air Force will hold public RAB meetings at least once every 3 months or as deemed necessary by the majority of the RAB members. Has this ever been followed? First question. And I have been a primary member since it formed, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have never had a vote on changing this rule. Now, section 3.3 co-chair is a 12-month term. Have we followed this rule? Also, 3.3, subject to being changed by written notification in the future, AFCEC-CIB has designated the BRAC program manager for the former Wurtsmith Air Force Base to serve as the Air Force co-chair. So just because the Air Force decided they couldn't install a co-chair, they decided not to follow the procedures that we agreed to. I think that's a nice play. I also want to say that I'm extremely disappointed that during this time, we should have been having RAB meetings in our community. The Air Force has been meeting monthly or at least regularly in Lansing with Eagle. I need to ask why both the Air Force and Eagle can meet and talk about my community and agree to remediation without even so much as having a representative from my community in attendance. This whole affair is troubling to me and against everything that our community and the Air Force agreed to in the procedures manual. I believe it is my duty to my community to object to these violations of the procedures. I, as a primary member, am not allowed to have a say in remediation. The Air Force and Eagle are making those decisions for us. I am concerned about them making those decisions, and worse, treating my community as a second-rate, uneducated participant in a song and dance designed to make them look like they care for us. I know these are harsh words, but I feel I have no choice but to state that I believe is true. Remediation is not the priority of the Air Force or Eagle. Money is. My community is being treated as an evil stepchild of government, and give us a little bit and shut us up. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on with the next slide. I'll go back to, okay, so anything from the Airport Authority, Mr. Munson, I didn't introduce you earlier. Sorry about that. Is your mic ready to go?
Yes, it is. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I have audio now. And
can you hear me?
Yes. Who's this? Mike?
Yeah, this is Mike Munson with
Okay,
the Wurtsmith Airport Authority.
Go ahead if you got an update, please.
There was an action item for the airport to give an update on the community build operations in and around Clark's Marsh. That particular area is protected in our long-term plan for a proposed runway. So there will be no building in that area. So we need to close that action item. That said, I don't see an action item to address Clark's Marsh contamination, which I think we need to charge the Air Force to do that. That's the end of my statement.
Okay, thank you. Anything for the Township of Au Sable? Check if your mic is muted. Okay, we'll come back. Anything for MDHHS? Hello, anything for MDHHS?
Yes, this is Abi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I have a few updates from DHHS. And the first one is about the public health advisory for wildlife from the Clark's Marsh. And based on available information from the Clark's Marsh, do not eat public health advisory has been issued for all residents, aquatic and semi-aquatic wildlife from the Clark's Marsh. And the second update I have is regarding the residential well resampling in Oscoda area. DHHS has mailed over 400 letters to residents in the Oscoda area to resample their well water. And the resampling include drinking water wells previously tested for PFAS or who were offered a filter without their wells being tested or both. And we have been also calling residents to make appointments and collect water samples. And a few residential will have been sampled in the week of March 16. And then sampling is on hold now due to the COVID-19 emergency. And the purpose of sampling is to evaluate if the concentration of PFAS is changing the drinking water wells. And the other update I have is regarding the Oscoda project. And now a core team has been formed for the Oscoda project that includes the project manager, epidemiologist, health educator and toxicologist. We are planning to have a listening session in Oscoda to get input from the residents and form a stakeholder group. The date hasn't been final yet, so as soon as it has been final, we'll let you know. So those are my updates for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me go back to Al Sabo. Jeffrey, are you able to speak now? Or anything to
Yeah,
say?
it seems I'm unmuted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hello, everybody. It's been 6 months or more since we've been able to speak about the concerns of our community. Asabo Township has been doing a little expanding of their testing, and we appreciate that the state has done so. Unfortunately, they're finding that we're more affected by the PFAS contamination as once believed. There hasn't been an explanation as to where the contamination source is coming from, but it seems that the flows coming through the river have been expressly elevated through the information that I've seen and that we've been handed out. We're asking for more testing and expanded testing. So I'm hoping that that's an item that will be addressed in the short fall, not on the long term. We need to find out how much of the township is being affected by what I believe to be the surface water, because we can't seem to find a particular source that the PFAS would be coming from. So that's the major update for us, that we need a little more understanding of where the contamination is coming from and how far is the contamination south of the river. And that's my update.
Thank you. Anything from Oscoda Township, Tim Cummings?
Yes, this is Tim Cummings. Yeah, thank you. What I wanted to point out, two things. What Arnie said earlier in his speech is really quite important here. It concerns about the interim action before the RI is completed is a huge point. And I just want to make sure that this isn't lost, because the presentation we're about to hear here is going to talk about how we're not even going to complete the RI until 2022. So we need interim action. We need interim solutions. We need to find out whether or not Eagle, who mentioned that they're going to call for interim actions, is actually going to press for them in any kind of urgency. I would have liked to have asked that question of them directly when they were doing the presentation, but I couldn't get through. I was muted. So that's my concern for Oscoda Township.
Okay, thank you. DH, anything for the department?
I think that they are muted.
They are muted. Let me unmute them here. Let's see. There we go. Any updates?
Is this for District Health Department?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate the importance that we see in our everyday lives today of the value and importance of health. Our whole existence and normal routines have been interrupted to save lives. And health over economics, and I think that united approach we're seeing with the pandemic, I would urge us to expeditiously continue to unite in this it's really an insidious chronic health problem. But I think there are health implications to our residents with ongoing exposure. And I do think lives are negatively impacted, including early loss of life. And in terms of that united effort, I do see legislative support. I see more and more science coming out. I hear from the people in the community, their outrage, their disappointment. And I hear state partners gleaning more science and working towards actions. I'm disappointed that there's this like Department of Defense action. And do you think interim measures? When we look at the pandemic, we're interrupting transmission, we're eliminating the risk of exposure and saving lives. I would like to see that same science and the epidemiology applied to this case. I think we cannot wait for actions for 2022, that every effort now will impact. And anytime we do a look back, I feel as if we need to be held accountable that we did everything possible to mitigate exposure, protect the environment for future generations, and look at our people, what they've been exposed to for, as Kathy said, a decade. And look at what we're doing around this pandemic, and let's apply that sense of urgency to really addressing this health issue. And I am so grateful for the people that made time today to be on this call and this webinar. And I hope we continue to go forward in a united fashion, and that the Department of Defense, specifically the Air Force, will provide us with answers and more information. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we have Mr. Ben Weiss from the Forest Service.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'll be the representative around here locally for the Forest Service. I don't have any other talking points aside from what was put up, but just wanted everybody to know that we are engaged and want to help out in any way possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the stakeholder updates. We again we went a little bit over time, but I wanted to make sure everybody had a moment and had their proper time to voice their comments. So let's press forward with the presentations. If we go to the next slide, and just to watch the time, if unless we have any questions or comments that are pertinent, yes, let's keep those to the RAB members. If it's something that can wait for the end, let's put it on the questions box, and we can have those answered at the end. So I'll hand it over to Eagle now, and Beth and whoever else.
Hey, thank you. So Jeremiah Morris from AECOM will be providing most of the transducer study update presentation. Thank you. Jeremiah?
Jeremiah, you're unmuted, but you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm going to give an update on the Eagle transducer study that has taken place the past couple of years. If we can go to the next slide. So, one back. So this presentation will have 4 parts. First, we'll go over the objectives, and then the scope of the study, and then we'll go over results, and then I'll hand it back over to Beth to talk about the next steps. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about the objectives. Next slide. All right, so this heat map showing total PFAS detected in groundwater best depicts the driver for Eagle's transducer study. So this figure shows all the analytical results from groundwater samples, both environmental, which are represented by the circles, and residential drinking water samples, represented in squares, collected to date. The reason we're showing total PFAS and not just the compounds that have criteria, which are PFOA, PFOS, are because products containing PFAS like AFFF that impact groundwater are made up of dozens of PFAS compounds. And each of these different PFAS compounds can move through the aquifer differently. So it's better to look at total PFAS, or the sum of all the detected PFAS concentrations, because it gives a more holistic picture of where impacted groundwater is or could be in the future. So each of these colored squares or circles represents the highest concentration of total PFAS at each location. After PFAS was found widespread across the former Air Force Base, Eagle focused efforts to determine if there were impacts outside the former base boundary. As you can see, PFAS was found all throughout the Oscoda area. Some of these areas were determined to not be the result of on-base activities. For example, PFAS impacted groundwater in the Colbeth area to the north of the former base was a result of a AFFF being used on a house fire. And another is the Oscoda High School area, where PFAS impacted groundwater was, or is the result of AFFF on nearby, or being used on a nearby forest fire and later in a bus garage fire. So one area Eagle has been unable to determine a source of PFAS impacted groundwater is the east side of Benetton Lake. So in the spring of 2018, Eagle decided to conduct a study on the east side of Benetton Lake to better understand groundwater flow directions and how it changes over time. Next slide. And then we'll just go through quickly about the study part of this. Next slide. So to better understand the dynamics of groundwater flow on the east side of Benetton Lake, instruments called pressure transducers, or transducers for short, were installed in Eagle monitoring wells. These instruments measure the groundwater elevation at regular time intervals by sensing the change in water pressure as the water levels move up and down inside a well. The pictures in the slide show what a typical transducer looks like, which is on the left-hand side there, and how they're installed in monitoring wells, which is the photo on the right. Next slide. So transducers were installed in a total of 20 monitoring wells, with an additional one installed at Benetton Lake Dam to measure lake levels. The blue and yellow highlighted locations were installed in April 2018. The blue highlighted locations had transducers removed in December of 2018 and redeployed in newly completed monitoring wells, which are highlighted in orange, which are mainly between Benetton Lake and Lake Huron. The transducer located at Benetton Dam was also removed in 2018 due to the potential damage or loss from winter lake ice. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about the results now. Next slide. So this figure shows groundwater elevation and general direction of groundwater movement within the Wurtsmith-Oscoda area. Another way to think of this figure is as a groundwater topography map. There are two sets of groundwater elevations from two separate measuring events. The yellow lines are from a 1983 USGS report, and the blue lines are more recent groundwater elevations from 2018. The gray arrows represent general direction of groundwater flow. Both data sets are included to show the similarity in groundwater conditions over time, even with the additional monitoring well locations installed by Eagle, decades after the initial USGS reports. Groundwater generally flows from topographic highs to topographic lows, which in this area are surface water bodies like the El Salvo River to the south of the base, or Benetton Lake to its east, Lake Huron. Groundwater on base flows from the west. As it moves across the base, it divides in two directions: east discharging into Benetton Lake and south into Clark's Marsh, and eventually the El Salvo River. On the east side of Benetton Lake, groundwater is flowing from a high at Sevier Lake, then divides in directions either west into Benetton Lake or east in Lake Huron. This divide extends all the way south between Benetton Lake and Lake Huron. Previous studies indicated a potential influence of nearshore groundwater levels at the southeastern end of Benetton Lake due to the seasonal artificial raising and lowering of the lake level. The next few slides, we'll take a little closer look at this. Next slide. So one way to show this Van Etten Lake influence is to look at groundwater maps from 2 different times of the same year. These next 2 slides do this by showing groundwater elevation maps from different seasons focused on the southeastern end of Lake Van Etten, or Van Etten Lake, sorry. Note this map has been rotated 90 degrees to zoom into this part of the lake. North is now to the left. Blue lines again represent the groundwater elevation contours, and the light blue arrows are groundwater flow directions. And the blue points are the monitoring wells where groundwater was measured to create these maps. Also note that the groundwater elevation contour intervals used in this figure are 1/2 foot instead of the 5-foot 5-foot intervals that were used in the previous figure. And this is just to show more detail in the groundwater elevation and flow directions. This slide depicts groundwater conditions from December of 2018, when the lake was at its lowered winter level, which is approximately 4 feet lower than summer. One thing to notice is that the groundwater flow direction west of the divide pretty clearly indicates groundwater moving towards Van Etten Lake all along the shoreline shown, similar to how it's shown in the previous slide. Next slide. In contrast, this figure shows groundwater contours from July of 2019, when Van Etten Lake water level is at its summertime high. Note the difference in groundwater elevation contours and flow arrows from the previous slide, especially in the vicinity of LDMW 003, which is kind of at the southeastern end of that lake, and then near the dam. This indicates that during summer, when Van Etten Lake is full or at its highest levels, the lake is potentially affecting the groundwater levels or flow direction in near shore groundwater within a few hundred feet of the shore. However, both of these elevation maps are just snapshots in time of groundwater conditions. To get a better idea of the dynamics between lake level and near shore groundwater, we need to look at continuous groundwater elevations over time and compare them to continuous lake levels. Next slide. Slide 12. Or I'm sorry, the next slide. Okay, thank you. Nope, sorry, go back one. All right, so the red circles are 3 of the locations in which transducers were installed to record the water level elevations every 6 hours. The 2 here on the east side of Van Etten Lake were installed in monitoring wells, and the 3rd that you see by the dam was installed right next to the dam to measure the lake water levels. On the next slide will be a graph of water elevation data over time from these 3 locations. These points are selected to first show groundwater close to Van Etten Lake that shows little to no effect from water level changes in the lake. Next slide. All right, so this graph showing water elevation from the 3 previously shown locations over time. Date or time is shown on the x-axis, and water level elevation is on the y-axis. The orange and purple lines are the 2 groundwater monitoring wells from the last figure, and the red line is Van Etten Lake water elevations during the same time period, which is from April 2018 to July 2019. Continuous water level data from Van Etten Lake was only collected for approximately half of that time. As I stated before, the transducer was installed near the dam and had to be removed in December due to potential of being damaged or lost from ice on the lake. So let's look first at the elevation data from Van Etten Lake, which is the red line. You can see right after the transducer was installed in April 2018, the lake level was raised for the summer. You can also see in mid-October when the lake level was lowered again for the winter. You'll also notice the large spikes in water level in the spring and fall, and these are most likely due to a fast snowmelt or rain events that fill up the lake. In contrast, observe the orange line, which represents the monitoring well on this chart furthest from Lake Van Etten, which is approximately 850 feet from the shore. Notice how there's a gentle rise in groundwater elevation, peaking at the end of April, then gradually drops into late March before beginning to rise again. This is typical for this type of aquifer, rise in groundwater in late winter into spring from snowmelt and spring rains, then gradually lowering and groundwater elevations during the drier months. The purple line represents a monitoring well that is closer to Van Etten Lake. This particular one is approximately 400 feet from the shore. Notice how the elevation trend over time is similar to the other monitoring well, the orange line. However, there are times, like in the spring of 2008, when the change in water elevation over time somewhat correlates to the change in lake water elevation. The next slide, we'll look at groundwater elevations from a monitoring well point that's closer to the lake that shows a more pronounced influence from the lake levels. Next slide. All right, so the next graph will compare Van Etten Lake water elevations, which is the one on the right, the circled point on the right, to groundwater elevation located in the other monitoring well across the lake from it. And this location is approximately 200 feet from Lake Shore. And those familiar with the area, that is just on the north side of Loud Drive, near where the railroad tracks cross the road. Next slide. So as of the previous graph, Van Etten Lake water elevations over time are shown in red. The groundwater elevations over time for the monitoring well circled on the previous slide is represented in purple. Right away, you should notice the difference between the groundwater elevations over time of this monitoring well and the monitoring well shown in the previous graph. First, the water elevation of Van Etten Lake is higher than the elevation of the groundwater at this location when the lake is at its summertime high level. Second, notice during the summer months how similar the two lines look. If you look closely, you'll see that when there's a rise or fall in the lake water elevation, there's a similar response shortly thereafter in the groundwater elevation. What this is indicating is that in this location, when the lake is at its highest level, the lake is influencing nearshore groundwater elevations and potentially discharging lake water into nearshore groundwater. Next slide. So in conclusion of this study, groundwater conditions east of Van Etten Lake are similar to previous studies. The groundwater flows south from the Topographic High of Cedar Lake south and divides either east in Lake Huron or west in Van Etten Lake. Based on the current set of data from this and previous studies, combined with the current hydrogeologic understanding of this area, it is unlikely PFAS impacted groundwater from the former base is migrating beneath the lake, impacting groundwater north and east of Van Etten Lake. Next slide. However, there is influence of nearshore groundwater levels around the southeastern end of Van Etten Lake due to the seasonal artificial raising and lowering of the lake level, as shown in this figure. This lake level influence may have implications for understanding detections of PFAS in groundwater within a few hundred feet of Van Etten Lake shore. Three of these possibilities are: one, elevated near shore detections of PFAS may be from the undetermined sources up groundwater gradient. Two, PFAS impacted groundwater discharging from the former base into Van Etten Lake could be impacting the surface water, and then surface water is infiltrating into nearshore groundwater along that southeastern end of the lake. Or three, it could be a combination of these two processes. However, more data is needed focusing on that southeastern nearshore area before the exact mechanism impacting nearshore groundwater is understood. Next slide. And so now I'll turn over to Beth to kind of go over the next steps for this study.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Eagle has completed their portion of the transducer study on the eastern portion of on the eastern side of Van Etten Lake. And during the RI process, Eagle will be asking Air Force to determine how far the PFAS is moving off the base and how it is moving off the base, which is pretty consistent with remedial investigations to determine, and we'll call it the nature and extent, and then fate and transport of the PFAS. And so thank you, and thank you, Jeremiah. And let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, does that conclude the Eagle presentation? Or?
Yes, it does.
Perfect.
And Malcolm, I know this is bad timing, but we did miss MDNR with the MDHHS update, so I'm not sure if we could fit them in at the end.
Yeah, just remind me right before the public comment section.
Okay, thank you.
Malcolm, could I ask a quick question, Beth?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. RAB members, please, if you have comments or on.
okay. Regarding the remedial investigation, including a conceptual site model and the fate and transport that she just said, the Air Force, I want to make clear that the Air Force is going to be doing their own independent conceptual site model and flow and characterization of PFAS off the base to include this same area that we were just briefed on.
Artie, do you have a question or a statement?
Am I correct? Is the Air Force going to include in their CSM and fake transport this particular area, or is that a done deal because of what we were just briefed on by Eagle?
Which particular area are you?
Southeast of Van Etten Lake toward Lake Huron.
I'm not sure if you want to go back to, if you're saying the east side of the Van Etten Lake, I don't think so.
So you have no intention to do any further investigation in your RI?
On the east side of Van Etten Lake.
And there's a determination in the ESI to say that? So there's no data gap on this issue?
How about if you submit me the question, I mean, you're asking me to commit at this point that the Air Force is never going to investigate something, and I guess I'm uncomfortable with until you give me specifically the area that you're talking about ever being explored. I don't feel comfortable making a statement answering that question at this time.
Okay, and we can do it in the 30 days you've given us after this RAB meeting to, for any of us, including the public, to submit questions or recommendations or statements. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you.
I might make the point that the USGS survey also has a big question mark in the same area, and that CERCLA requires not absolute proof, but just the possibility of base-related contamination in order to require remedial action.
Are you making a statement? Or is this a question?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's a statement.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else before we move on to the Air Force presentation?
Sure, this is Beth again with Eagle, and I just wanted to say that in no way is this meant to replace the CSM for the remedial investigation. This is just, we're demonstrating the information that we've collected so far, and this is what we have so far based on Eagle investigations. And so that's what we're trying to convey here. Thank you.
Okay, let's move forward in our meeting. So let's move forward to the next presentation by the Air Force. All right, Dave.
Hello again, everyone. This first slide here is talking about the overview of where we are in the CERCLA process for the PFAS contaminant of concern. The expanded site inspection we just completed here at the end of last year. The report came out earlier this year. That was a stopgap measure, I would say, to look at the drinking water pathway, because that drinking water pathway was the most important pathway to determine impacts on the local populace. So that ESI was very focused. Now that the process, the funding for the programming has come through, we're now going to move into the remedial investigation. And you can see the rest of the blocks here. I'm hoping that many of the RAB members are already familiar with the basic process itself. Next slide. So there will be several slides here that we'll be covering. My intent is not to get into the details as if this ESI is a definitive document to provide sufficient technical information to provide interim actions. So the PFAS PA was done in January 2016. Beginning in October 2018, looking at the presence and absence of PFAS, AFFF components within the base. We have the final ESI released in January. The responses, the Air Force responses to Eagle's comments will be forthcoming shortly. We received them back in January. That was a very fast turnaround time for Eagle, and we appreciate it. The way that the final ESI will be addressed based upon comments received from Eagle will be an addendum document. There are corrected figures, the response to comments, but the final ESI itself, there were no substantive comments to cause the final ESI to be corrected. So when that should be within the next month, that addendum will be released. Next slide. So there were 5 objectives that the Air Force had for this expanded site investigation, and they're outlined here. Wanted to try to delineate plumes at various areas of the base, Arrow Street and FCO2, to look at the past data from the collected at the base to confirm what the potential sources of the PFAS and PFOA, update and revise groundwater models, and then to develop recommendations going forward. Next slide. So looking at objective number 1, the bottom line was there were no drinking water receptors for using the groundwater to be downgraded of these areas 1 and 15, which was good news. Also determined that the existing wells that were in place, the extraction wells, were not capturing the complete plume. And so Natasha, if you could hit that shallow 10 to 15, 10 to 25 foot, just to bring that up. Now, this is intentionally not blown up so you can read every word on here. It's just to see that yellow markings there as to where that appears on the base. It's highly related to where the sites are. Natasha, if you can go back to the slide again and look at the interim 25 to 40. Relatively the same plume area. Natasha, you could go back to so we can go to the deep. So in relatively speaking, the PFAS seems to be more in the shallower zones. And Natasha can go back to the slide and go to the particle tracking. At this point, based upon what Wood did, this is how water would flow from the various sites, hydrogeologically speaking. You can go back to the slide again, Natasha. Next slide. Now, looking at areas 2 and 7, we're looking at downgradient wells, indicated non-detect or low concentrations of PFAS, PFOA below the lifetime health advisory. And again, the existing extraction wells don't capture the extent of the PFAS contamination. Areas 4 and 6, again, no known receptors for the groundwater downgradient of areas 4 and 6 and did not confirm a source area. Next slide. So objective number 2, the width of the plume for FTO2. Again, we're looking at the complete PFOS PFOA plume is not being captured by the existing extraction wells. Objective 3 was accomplished. This was a given that Wood did go through all the previous information. That was used to develop the sampling plan for the ESI. Next slide. So updating and revising the groundwater models, we're preparing reports. We've seen the diagrams here as far as the direction of the particle tracking. Again, I'm not going to get into the details of that information at this point during this briefing. The report is out there, is available. The report will be used in the development of the well locations for the RI investigation. Next slide. So now we get into the recommendations, and the bottom line is the recommendation to conduct that remedial investigation. And you can go through the list here of the items that are recommended. They are all part of a normal remedial investigation, identifying ARRs, looking at all media, not just the drinking water route, evaluating the GSI, the groundwater surface interface, performing that complete baseline risk assessment, and updating the conceptual site model for PFAS. Next slide. And if we could continue here, would also talk about items such as fingerprinting the AFFF source, evaluating stormwater discharges, trend analyses for groundwater flow, and examining the soil and groundwater. Next slide. And wrapping up, I believe here, of expanding the treatment, the capture of contaminants at FTO2 and Mission Street, and looking at a Sentinel well program for PFOS, PFOA. We're not detecting in the private residential drinking water wells an increase in contamination beyond what we've ever detected, and the amount of the trend is decreasing. So the Sentinel well plan would help us with installing wells at points that we would like to know that the migration has gotten to a certain point. Next slide. So this is was brought up earlier for the DIRT program. When you complete the site inspection phase, there's 3 responses to that. Either you find that there's no reason to act, you find the need for immediate action, detecting something that's an imminent hazard to human health, and then there's a need for remedial investigation. And so based upon the ESI, where we are is continuing the remedial investigation approach. There's obviously contamination, and there are some areas on the base that exceed the lifetime health advisory level, but no one is being exposed at a imminent health concentration. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's an actual contaminant level that's been determined. We're dealing with lifetime exposure levels. I think that's 40 years or something like that. So we're proceeding with the remedial investigation per DERP, CERCLA, and the National Contingency Plan. Next slide. Any questions on that portion of the presentation?
This is Arnie Larich. I'd like to ask on that last slide, if you could bring it up. The middle one, bullet, immediate action, imminent hazard to human health. Has the Air Force done any evaluation with data that the Eagle has provided since 2012 regarding do not eat the fish, in Clark's Marsh and the Asable. And recently in October 18, do not eat the deer. And have you looked at that data in the last 2 to 6 years to make this determination in this ESI that there's no imminent hazard to human health?
I cannot speak directly to knowledge that DOD or the Air Force is actually examining Eagle's data. No, I am aware that DOD does have a PFAS working group of scientists that are working with various organizations such as ATSDR that looking at this information, the toxicology, and evaluating with them what that might lead to as far as decision making for DOD and the Air Force. At this point, I don't know any definitive criteria beyond the lifetime health advisory that would be in line to be considered by DOD or regulatory agency to cause a determination of an imminent health hazard.
Okay, but I'd just like to repeat what I shared with the Air Force a year and a half ago, and that is at Pease Air Force Base, EPA provided criteria for doing human health risk assessments, and one of them was the flesh of mammals, and it was more, for screening criteria, it was lower than this do not eat that the Eagle has set, which was 300 per billion. So they've blown that by 3 or 4 times over the EPA criteria that was set in 2017. So something I would ask that the Air Force look into.
Well, I might, Mr. Neller or Beth, are you aware of any guidelines from Eagle where there's been contaminant levels for eating fish or deer that have been established?
Abhi with MDHHS, would you want to speak to the health advisories that are in place?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a do not eat fish advisory from the Clark's Marsh since 2012. And the amount of PFAS that has been found in the fish is in the 1,000 range. And then also, we have a do not eat deer advisory from the Clark's Marsh due to PFAS that are found in the muscle 2 times the do not eat level. And then we have also like the surface water concentration in the Clark's Marsh is in the thousands, like 5,000. And we have also a do not eat public health advisory for wildlife, particularly resident wildlife from the Clark's Marsh. So we have all those health evaluation and advisories in the area. And also we have the foam advisory from the Van Atten Lake. So since 2011, we have a couple of advisory, public health advisory that are in place based on the data.
Thank you. Arnie, I think the imminent health hazard would be similar to an Air Force base where they found through the expanded site investigation for PFAS that the actual water supply was contaminated with PFAS, PFOA above the lifetime health advisory. And that's something the public, their water supply, their municipal water supply was pulling in PFAS, PFOA above the lifetime health advisory for people out to use daily. That's an imminent health hazard. That's an immediate action criteria.
David?
Okay, let's can we move forward? We're behind time now. If it's something we could address off, within the AI or send us a question. But can we move forward to the next presentations just for the sake of time? And that way also we'll have plenty of time for people to have public comments and questions at the end. So you guys just want to, can we jump over to the next slide or the next presentation, please? Yeah,
next slide.
If everybody's okay, yeah, let's skip the break and let's just go on to this. And like I said, that way we can have some good public comment time. All right, go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thank you. So we received funds for the remedial investigation, and as pointed out in the last block there on the page, those funds were due to come in FY21. They came in this year, a year early. So we are proceeding with the award of a contract a year early. And point out that middle block there that during an RI process, it is possible to do an interim action. And Mr. Neller identified several interim actions that would be of interest, and it is possible to conduct those interim actions during an RI. So this $13.5 million for PFOS/PFOA for 2020, that's to allow us to complete or conduct the remedial investigation. So as the project manager, I have to be diligent in ensuring at the end of this contract, which is for the RI, to get to the point of having the baseline risk assessment completed that addresses all pathways and the required remedial investigation report recommending further work, that has to be completed. So that's following the circle process, and so I've got to ensure as a project manager that I'm going to be getting my remedial investigation completed. Next slide. So in this overall slide here, we're looking at the top two blocks, the scoping and the site characterization. So this contract should be awarded by the end of September of this year. That gets into the winter season, which is fortunate because the contractor will be identifying, looking at previous data, what data do we have, starting to look at the ARAR requirements and what would be applicable, developing the data quality objectives, and collecting data to update that conceptual site model. And from that initial data gathering by the contractor, they're going to go through a scoping process or through the scoping meetings, and developing that work plan. And it's going to be that work plan that is going to be the point of agreement with the Air Force and Eagle as to where our well is going to be installed, what kind of samples are going to be collected and where, what are the data quality objectives, and because that is going to drive the remedial investigation in the summer of next year. So that'll be really the main point where the community is going to see what the plan is, and Eagle will have input on that. And it's going to use all this past data that we've obtained from the ESI and the SI for PFAS at Wurtsmith. So that's really the next time frame for good information as to where we're going next, is that work plan. And really the time frame for installing a remedy comes in at that record of decision. You can see the work that has to be done in order to get to that record of decision to install the remedy. And even with an interim action, there's still going to have to be work in the feasibility study area, proposed plan, et cetera, to get to that step. Next slide. So here's the schedule that AFCAC, the Air Force, can come up with at this point based upon how the work should flow. The contractor is going to be who develops the actual schedule to meet the contract requirements. So soon after award of the contract, they're going to be developing the schedule for the project, which incorporates all the review times for documents, the time frame to collect, samples, get the analyses completed, the upfront planning, et cetera. So the schedule, the details of how work will flow will be happening soon after that award in September. So during these winter months coming up, we're going to be getting that conceptual site model completed, developing the data quality objectives, and getting the work plan done. And we want to get that done in time for the contractor to get out in the field the first available day and month of next summer. And during the summer, getting all the samples collected, the wells installed, initial rounds of sampling, et cetera, get that done before the winter season kicks in. They'll be conducting this baseline risk assessment, again, of all the pathways for human health exposure, and then completing the remedial investigation report, estimating at April 2020 or 2022 to start the review process with Eagle. And then based upon the findings of that investigation, developing any requirements for feasibility studies. Let's check the next slide real quick, Natasha. Now let's go back one then. So during this, the work plan stage is where I want to look at these areas of interest for interim actions based upon past data, FTO2, Mission Street, the Air Force Beach area. Is there a way to plan out the installation of wells or the collection of samples to encourage the early development of data that would substantiate and help the Air Force know that we will have an efficient, effective remedy installed? So during that discussion is where I want to entertain how we can address interim actions. But I've got to ensure that I meet the overall goal of a remedial investigation for the base. So we're going to be looking at judicious use of resources to complete the RI and answer as much as possible the extent and magnitude direction of either soil, surface water, or groundwater around the base to have enough information to develop a feasibility study. So I hope that answers the questions of interim actions and how they might be built in. So we have to do the RI, but maybe we can do it in a way that gets to enable us to get to a decision on going to the feasibility study phase for certain areas of contamination or certain sites. Let's see, are there any questions at this point? Okay, next slide.
Excuse me, Dave.
Yes.
It's Jeff Moss. A question that I have in regards to the $13.5 million. It was a couple slides ago. Can you go back 2 or 3 slides for a moment, please? One more. There it is. So the Air Force the Congress allocated $13.5 million for interim action for the 2020 budget. Is that's correct?
No.
What was the $13.5 million allocated to DOD for?
To conduct the remedial investigation.
I guess that's my question. So we knew that we were in the ESI and the DOD. Didn't they allocate money for the RI previous to this $13.5 million that Congressman Kildee and I'm sure the senators had some interest in getting it through, but wasn't there already a budget number for the RI to occur? Because if they didn't allocate the 13.5 million, how are you going to do the RI?
I'm not sure. If you read the words here, we'll just start with that.
I understand what you're saying on your slide, okay?
Okay.
And I don't mean to be adversarial, but my point to this is that we were in the ESI situation with Matt Mars, and we knew we were coming into that phase, and we knew we were there in 2019, and that was going to take care of itself through mediation with Eagle and the state of Michigan and the Air Force and DOD. But the money it was going to take to do the RI had to be allocated to continue that negotiation before the $13.5 million was allocated for remediation from the congressional budget. So my question is, if the 13.5 million wasn't allocated, would the RI not have gotten done?
I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, if the RI could not be done until funds were allocated. The previous work was the PA and SI, and the focus was: the populace being exposed to drinking water to PFAS, PFOA at unacceptable levels? That was the ESI focus, okay? And that was an SI.
Yeah.
And if I understand your question correctly, is that if Congress did not provide the funds this year for the RI to be put on contract, then the work to get the RI on contract could not be done.
Interesting. So then we would have just been on hold this year and nothing would have been done because there wouldn't have been any funds in the 2020 budget from DOD to continue the process at Wurtsmith Air Force Base?
In short, yes. AFCAC does not have its own set of funds to do work outside of what Congress allocates. And I could somewhat clarify a little bit that with Wurtsmith, there is not a municipal water supply that has a problem and has to have an immediate action. So the conditions of Wurtsmith, of where it is, the next step is the remedial investigation. And unless there's funding, we cannot contract that work.
Okay, well, I'm going to contest two things. The first thing is that it seemed to me that the $13.5 million that Congress put into the 2020 budget was for remediation action at Wurtsmith, not a remedial investigation, but actual remediation. I'll contest that first. The second thing is we've been dealing with the contamination problem here at Wurtsmith for decades. And so we have a drinking water problem and continue to have a surface water problem. So when you say we're not sure that we meet certain criteria, I'm going to challenge that, because we wouldn't be doing what we're doing without that contamination issue and how much the DOD, the state, the community is all interacting with what's going on. So I don't, you'll excuse me for not agreeing with what you have to say in those 2 points.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is that, are you done with the, is that the end of the presentation, Dave?
Yes.
Okay. If we can move forward with the agenda.
Malcolm, this is Kathy. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, good. Yes.
Okay, so there's lots of comments that are happening in the chat that are not being mentioned as questions. So can we include those, please?
Yes, you're asking like include them at the end of the public comment period?
No, ask people, this is a time for people, for the community RAB members to ask questions, is it not?
Yes.
Oh, during the presentation, which is relevant?
Right, so, okay, so the way we were gonna do that was have the hand raising, but I guess we're not following that. So let's, I guess.
It's not working.
Yeah, that's looking like it's happening. Okay, so, well, I guess let's just go down the list. I mean, where are we on the, what's the next question from the RAB members for the Air Force regarding the last presentation?
If you look in the chat, you'll see that I made a comment. Joe Maxwell's made a comment. Aaron Weed has made 2 comments. Daniel Stock has made comments. As far as this hand raising thing, maybe that appears for people who are not on the RAB, but I have nowhere on my screen as a participant of a hand that I can click on. My only place to provide you feedback is the question box.
All right, so let me go through this.
Hi, this is Les with Eagle, and we're monitoring the back and forth. The individuals who are listed as panelists, apparently you can only write your questions in the chat function. Apparently, we've just discovered that. So yes, there are questions that are in there that the folks who have been speaking so far during the meeting, that's the only means of being able to write their comments down. So yes, there are some questions there that need to be answered.
Okay, so let me scroll through this and I will do my best to get those out there. Okay, so let me see here. We go back. So I'm going to go back to, let's see, Robert Taser. That's let's see, when are we going to get to remediation? Was that is that addressed or no?
No.
Okay, is that a question? So that's a question pertinent to the presentation. Is that directed? That's directed to Dave. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
that's
Dave.
when it was. That was when it was provided.
Okay, so Robert Taser had a question. When are we going to get to remediation?
All right, Natasha, if you can go back to the slide showing the flow for the process. Go back one. This is a good one we can use. So remediation happens when we have a record of decision. Now, if you're asking me for Wurtsmith Air Force Base for PFOS, PFOA, when will remedies be in work? When will they be in the field installing a remedy? I can't say at this time. I can only point out that we're in the RI phase and there's a feasibility study phase and then to the proposed plan and the ROD review, public comment period. And so if you go forward a couple slides, Natasha, to the schedule right there. So August 22 is the, my estimate for when the feasibility study process would start, which is, a step prior to the ROD. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
David, can I clarify one thing quick?
Yes.
Okay, in that Air Force instructional manual I referenced before, it says interim remedial action. Conduct short-term actions to address immediate threats to the environment or to prevent further contaminant migration. And then the second bullet is remedial actions taken during the RI are not that are not complete or final remedial action. So that's a definition of an interim mitigation action. And there's evidence at Wurtsmith that the Air Force took one at FTO2 long before the RI stage. So we've got a definitional problem we've had for years.
Okay, I'm going to go down the list here. So the next one that I can track here is Joe Maxwell. And, well, it disappeared on me. Joe Maxwell, okay. There we go. Do you have a question, Mr. Joe Maxwell?
No question, just a statement.
Okay.
Well, Malcolm, if I can, just that $13 million was out of a total of $48 million for BRAC for all the 39 bases. So there are the relevant risk that we have to consider for all the BRAC sites. So $13 million for Wurtsmith, and it does include elements, the ability to conduct interremedial actions. So we've got to look at the judicious collection of data to get us to the point where we can develop interim action for what the priorities are for the base when we get that data in. So FTO2, Mission Street, the extraction wells in the benzene field, and et cetera, Arrow Street, and perhaps Air Force Beach. So let's get the data collected in the best manner possible to progress the RI and get to the point where we've got sufficient data to work these interim actions. But from the quote there from the Secretary of the Air Force, it's the remedial investigation, and we are allowed to look at interim actions that we can efficiently and effectively install.
Okay.
And again, that's going to be this fall and this winter time frame to examine what that investigation will look like to allow that to happen.
Okay. We have another, see, the other question was from Daniel Stock. Will any of the RI money be used to determine what needs to be done for Clark's Marsh?
Yes. And Clark's Marsh is part of the receiver that needs to be investigated.
Okay. And then let's see, you got two more. Let's see, Mr. Gaines, did they address that for you? The community schools have 2/3 of the population at an economic level requiring free reduced lunch. This means there are public health issues not covered by drinking water. Why will the Air Force not recognize that as a human health hazard?
That hasn't been covered. I myself have eaten fish and deer. Come from Clark's Marsh and from Van Etten Lake. My son no longer hunts there, but I have consistently observed people hunting in Clark's Marsh, and I'm concerned that they're getting health effects that aren't being recognized. People need to eat.
Okay. And then Mr. Weed, based on the slide 45, does this timeline mean that the earliest we will see remediation infrastructure to be installed is 2024? Slide 45. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to go through and actually, do a Gantt chart for that, but that seems about right. I would say yes, it's possible. Yes. If you're talking about, so we'll see what happens with interim actions based upon the data that we can collect here next summer and then review that to see if feasibility studies are begun earlier. But in general, that time frame, Mr. Weed, is a reasonable number.
Okay, and then the other comment by question by Mr. Aaron Weed: how is the Eagle data that already exists and all the data gathered from the Air Force not enough data?
The focus of the ESI was drinking water. And I've heard people talk about what's happening through soil, what's happening through deer and fish, what's happening through the transport to surface water. And the data that we collected from the ESI was focused on drinking water, because protection of the drinking water sources and people drinking water was the focus at that time, because there wasn't, funds for an RI. So we've got a lot of good data for groundwater, and that will be incorporated, but there's a dearth of information as far as all the other pathways.
Okay. Anything else from the RAB members regarding the Air Force presentations?
Yeah, it's Jeff Moss again. So
Yes.
is it my understanding now that based on this particular conversation, drinking water was the primary focus of the Air Force, but now that we're starting the RI portion of this investigation, we can start bringing forth the surface water issues that we've been talking about the last couple years that have not been a focus of this panel?
Yes.
Okay, that's a wonderful thing. Thank you, Dave. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Looks like I might have skipped a comment. Let me go back and check it out here. Let's see. Okay, Mr. Gibson, this is from Tim Cummings, after nearly 30 years, we're still talking about an RI needing to be completed. As I pointed out to the Air Force at a BRAC meeting in fall of 2016, Mother Nature is outpacing the Air Force as it documents and analyzes. In the meantime, the contamination spreads further off your old base. Okay, that was the comment. Okay. Let's see. And then the last one I'm seeing here is from Kathy Wisserbarth. Will the Air Force address the now priority statement for stopping flow of the plume by 2023? We considered this generous, and we are telling you we want the 13.5 or a portion of it to address the priority.
Well, as I've said, there's a remedial investigation, and we're going to apply as judiciously as possible through this scoping document, the work plan that is going to drive the work for next summer, as to what can we do to capture plumes that are not captured now, or some other pathway, surface water, or perhaps soil erosion, I don't know. Where are those hazards? And then focus resources, if available, if possible, that we can have enough information on an interim action to help stop migration. Does the work to install a remedy to stop migration by 2023 happen? I can't commit to that.
Okay, just a follow-up question. Is the technology not established to address PFAS plumes? We need more filtration systems. That's from Kathy Worsterbart. Let's see. Yeah.
That was a comment, correct?
No, is the technology not established to address the PFAS plumes? Is that?
Oh, there are the ion exchange. There's carbon, green sand, lots of technology that is being used at Wurtsmith and other bases to treat for PFAS, PFOA. So I get, yes, there's technology that's being used today to treat for PFAS, PFOA.
Okay, and I got, we are pushing the time limit here, so we're going to go ahead and do the first, one of the first questions that was asked that appeared. It comes from Rex Vaughn. CERCLA requires natural resource injury integration and imminent substantial endangerment evaluations, yet the Air Force has only focused on drinking water vectors. Michigan has identified several other vectors for human and wildlife ingestion of PFAS around Wurtsmith Air Force Base and has issued several do not eat orders. These health risks are particularly significant in a community where some parts of the population rely on hunting and fishing to meet their regular nutrition needs. Why has the Air Force ignored the human and wildlife health risks?
I'd have to say it was based upon the relative risks and the funding that was available to DOD and the Air Force. That where would we investigate? Do we look at the fish and the deer first, or do we look at what is the water quality that people are drinking every day?
And Dave, would that be more appropriate for the MDHS? Want to comment on that?
Well, no, what I heard the question say was the Air Force has been focusing on drinking water. What about all the other pathways? I'm trying to address that we have to, in a arena of limited funds, we focus the funds for the biggest bang or the biggest hazards we can think of, and that's drinking water. So that's why up until now it's been focused on the drinking water. Now that the funds are released for the remedial investigation, which is to complete all pathways, including deer and fish, and all the soil, groundwater to surface water, that's now all part of the RI. And it's no longer just trying to get to, is there an immediate problem with drinking water?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move forward unless anything else, just for the sake of time. We do have all these questions and comments recorded. We could get you an answer if we didn't get them during this meeting. Let's move on forward to the RAB business update. I don't, Dave and Arnie, can you guys, is this something we're going to address, or are we skipping this part? Please advise.
Dave,
that
you
way,
take
that way
that.
we can move forward with the public comment section.
Arnie? I believe that the items on the we had for the RAB business, we can postpone for the next RAB, but I am going to provide information to the community RAB for review by them to help prepare for the next RAB meeting to discuss those issues. That's reasonable with you, Arnie?
That's correct. We have not had enough guidance and ability on our own part to bring those two operating procedures and the action item review and closeout process. So we've asked for that extension, prepare it before the next RAB meeting is the goal, to bring it for briefing and approval.
So do you agree that we don't need to discuss any RAB business tonight?
Well, there is the co-chair election.
Okay.
Unless, I mean, it's something we could take a vote and say postpone it to the next one, but I don't think that's a good idea. do we have any people who put their names in?
So Malcolm, this is as a facilitator, you would have been handling this with Arnie.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, I guess that was something that we weren't able to nail down. But I guess if there is, I have not seen any clear nominations sent to me by the community rep. Not that I asked for them, so please don't get upset at me because of that comment. But I say we move forward. If there are clear nominations, I say we could take care of it in the next RAB, unless there is a desire to do that now. The RAB members, if you could send me a comment or a private note right now, we can address it. In the meantime, I say we move forward to the public comments, and then if something does come up, we'll go back and address the co-chair. Does that sound good?
Malcolm, I'd like to throw my hat in the ring to continue, but I am not against postponing the election until the next RAB meeting, to allow other people to think more about whether or not they want to become a co-chair.
Okay.
Since we can't do the raise your hand approach at this point, it sounds like, do you want to just do a voice count or around for the RAB members tonight as to, yays and nays to delaying it? Or I just want to try to get the RAB members to some way of recording that they agree to postpone or they want to vote tonight.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is, like I said, we're going to move into the public comment section. If the RAB members have someone to nominate, send me a private chat or an email, whatever, before the meeting's over, and I'll circle back to it, and then we'll either have a vote or not have a vote and move it to the next time. So let's move forward, please, to the public comments section. So we have first comments, and the first, let me pull this box up, make sure that we get everybody. Okay, so we had the first person, the first sign up we had for public comments and or question was Congressman Dan Kildee. Sir, are you on the line? And
Sir, you are self-muted.
Okay, there we go.
Welcome,
Can you
sir.
hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I was unfamiliar with this technology. Well, thanks. I'll be brief. I've been listening for the last 40 minutes or so. So my comments, I'll try to keep myself quite brief. I'm sure many of you know I've been involved in this issue in Oscoda for some time. It was first brought to me by the citizens there, and I've been working on it ever since. We've had some success, in terms of getting some additional dollars through a number of federal sources regarding drinking water, regarding getting Oscoda residents onto municipal water, Oscoda schools on municipal water, the health study. We passed legislation to look for additional sites. We did have some success in the Defense Authorization Act this last year. We're working on it again. We passed the PFAS Action Act in Congress. So there's been some dramatic change in the way Congress looks at this. A year or so ago, when I co-founded the bipartisan Congressional PFAS Caucus, hardly anybody was speaking about it. Now it's common conversation in Congress, particularly for those people who represent either current or BRAC sites. But I want to zero in on what obviously seems to be a point of contention. And as a person who pushed repeatedly and will continue to push for additional resources for cleanup, I'm concerned that the Air Force is continuing to bias its work around additional study and not on cleanup. When Congress pushed this through, the entire debate was about getting the cleanup done. And so the recently submitted ESI calls for additional studies and more data. And I understand there is always going to be a need to gather more information. However, it is clear under the law that interim measures are called for, not just allowable, but called for when there is an imminent, substantial endangerment of public health or the environment. And that doesn't have to be a narrow definition. We know that there is substantial endangerment. There's a health advisory for foam on Van Etten Lake, where people live, where people swim, where people fish. There are health advisories for deer, for fish, for small game in Clark's Marsh, in the AuSable River, where people live, where people recreate. And so in the legislation, it was intended that we take an aggressive approach. And when we see imminent, substantial endangerment of public health or environment, the intention of the law was that there would be interim measures taken to mitigate against those threats. So the 13.5 million, according to the letter from Secretary Barrett, the 13.5 million earmarked for cleanup of the former base mentions that money can be used to fund construction or expansion of additional treatment systems if needed. So my comment is simply this. I know what the congressional intent was. I'm the member of Congress that helped push this through along with my colleagues. So I'm asking the Air Force to use the majority of this money that we intended to be used for mitigation efforts for the purposes that they were intended for. This community's waited a long time. And I don't want to go through the litany of frustration that I've heard from them. But in the 40 minutes that I've been listening to this call, I have come to have a much better understanding of the source of their frustration. And so if it takes additional action by Congress, believe me, this has been an informative conversation for me, and I will make sure that we take additional action. But I simply ask that as a person who understands, who is a witness to the intent of Congress, and have been working with members of the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle, when there is an imminent and substantial danger, Congress has appropriated the money to clean up that danger, and that needs to be the focus. And with that, I appreciate the opportunity to participate, and we'll let go with that. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. And then for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead, unless you requested specifically to make a comment, I am just going to read the answer and have the appropriate person answer, or the question rather than have the answer. Okay, so the first one comes from Mr. Paul Rakowski. I would like to know the status of the PFAS plume investigation from Oscoda Township, from the Oscoda Township dump going into Van Etten Lake, and the status of mitigating the PFAS from discharging into the ground from Oscoda Township sewer plant that eventually goes into the AuSable River. The WWTP discharge is concurrent with an Air Force PFAS site. So, yes, is that I guess is that for the township or for the Air Force?
This is Amanda Armbruster with Eagle out of the Bay City District Office, and I could answer a little bit to the Oscoda Township dump question.
Perfect.
We don't have reason to believe that there is contamination that's reaching Van Etten Lake from Oscoda Township dump. We have several drinking water well samples between the dump and Van Etten Lake, and they had no impacts in them.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Greg Truesdale.
I think there was a second part to that one, though.
Oh, I'm sorry?
I think there was a second part to his question.
Okay.
That's
Did you,
somebody else.
and the status of the mitigating the PFAS from discharging into the ground from the township sewer plant that goes into the Asabo River. Let's go to township. Is that something you want to address?
Mr. Weed is saying to unmute him and he can answer Mr. Rakowski.
Sure. One moment. Let me get there.
Malcolm, this is Arnie. In the meantime, until he comes on, can I just say the Air Force has already said tonight and earlier that Clark's Marsh and the water treatment plume migrates toward Clark's Marsh, and that they will investigate this during the RI for their responsibilities. So they are a party in answering the question that was just raised.
Okay, it looks like Mr. Weezer muted. Do you have you want to comment on that, or?
Yes, regarding the contamination at the old Oscoda dump, as Amanda Armbruster has said, for her answer, in addition to that, the township is seeking additional funds to be able to do further testing in that area, so that way we know the full extent of the plume, so that we can then determine the actions for remediation. The township has no interest in delaying doing anything with the contamination of the dump. We just, first of all, have to have the funds for it before bankrupting the township, which would then degrade the entire area and be detrimental to the community as a whole. In addition to that, regarding the PFAS that's coming out of the sewer system, the old lagoon system that the Air Force owned, this had been addressed previously, so I'll repeat this information again. And that is that the documentation has been found to show that the Air Force had dumped PFAS directly into those drying beds. So the PFAS that exists there is from the Air Force having dumped that AFFF in there by way of routing what was coming off of the fire training site into an oil separating lagoon and then into the sewer system that they were operating at the time. So the mass pollution coming off of there is something for the Air Force to address. And so far the Air Force has said nothing about addressing that, other than that they are going to take a look at it.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to the next question. It's by Greg Truesdale. Has there been any studies of other area lakes like Cedar Lake? Is that probably Eagle?
This is Amanda Armbruster again. My understanding, and this investigation took place before I was the project manager. I've been managing the site only since about November of last year. But I believe that there was a surface water investigation of Cedar Lake, and there were some detections of PFAS in the lake, but not above the applicable GSI criteria, the groundwater surface water interface criteria, I don't believe. And there have been some foam samples, and again, there were some detections of PFAS in the foam, but we don't have criteria associated with foam to determine if there were exceedances or not. But there were some impacts found, but at significantly lower levels than what has been found in Van Etten Lake.
Okay. And then we got next question is by Phil Farina. Is there any plan to evaluate technologies that can improve the pump and trump treat system installed currently that uses only carbon treatment? Will better technology be explored? Dave, is that something you want to There you
Through our RI contractor, they had the ability to look at what's the latest technology to be, well, actually through the RI process, they're not going to be looking at feasibility studies for the fixes. The feasibility study is where all the parameters called for are considered as far as the most cost-effective lifetime approach. So I believe that DOD at least looks at the long term, or looks at specifically various technologies that are out there. But as far as my budget, I don't have a budget to go out and do treatment technology evaluation, for under the BEC. And I can look at a question. The answer to this question is what agencies are looking at new technologies or how that would be done. As far as developing, I mean, I've heard of incineration systems. I've heard of companies having some type of technology that basically zaps the PFOS, PFOA, but I've not seen anything definitive as to apply to our situation today. We'll capture that as an answer to develop later on.
Okay, thank you. Shannon Abbott, she had a quick question. Will there be a recording of this meeting shared with the attendees? The answer is yes. It'll be on our website, and that is AFCEC, Google AFCEC, and you will find it. I'll send a link out to everybody once it's posted. And the next, we have a comment. Mr. Anthony Spaniolio would like to make a public comment. Sir, are you still on? I think I don't see him in attendance anymore. I'm going to go ahead and close out the meeting. We have gone, hello?
Anthony is there and unmuted.
Anthony, wow, I didn't even see his name.
Sorry. Anthony, you're unmuted. If you could try speaking.
Is it under?
It's under the attendees list at the top. I see you muting and unmuting your microphone, sir, but we still can't hear you.
That's interesting. I don't see him at all. Okay. Mr. Spaniolo. We're gonna. We'll wait.
Okay, welcome.
Good.
This is Kathy Woosterbarth. I have Tony here, and I'm going to set him. I'm going to see if this will work to see if he can make a statement this way.
Okay.
All right, Tony.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect.
Yes, okay. They can hear you perfect.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make a brief statement. What I'm hearing is that the Air Force needs to take months, perhaps years, to determine if there is an imminent and substantial threat of endangerment to health or the public environment. It's ridiculous to say that you need that amount of time to determine if something is imminent. Imminent means imminent. It means now. And we know, and we have known for years, that there are imminent and substantial problems at Bennett Lake, at Clark's Marsh, and in the Osable River. The Air Force has chosen, its hands have not been tied. The Air Force has chosen to disregard the work that's been done by MDHHS, by local officials who have carefully documented that we have public health risks at these locations. The Air Force can walk and chew gum at the same time. You don't have to just look at water. And you've known that all along. There's nothing in CERCLA that ties your hands to do that. This was simply an arbitrary decision made by the Department of Defense without regard to the public health and safety of people in Oscoda. The Air Force has chosen to disregard studies and results that have been the result of expenditures by the state of Michigan, and now is attempting to redo those, wasting federal funds, wasting time, and harming human health. We demand and expect better, and action needs to be taken now. The Van Lake Association, Oscoda Township, and the anglers of the Au all came out in 2017 and asked for this imminent action to be taken. It has been ignored by the Air Force. And the Air Force blames Congress because it doesn't have the money, but the Air Force has failed to ask Congress for appropriate funds. The Air Force now has the money to do this. It should expend the funds now. It should address the plumes on Van Lake, particularly at the Air Force Beach, where we have health hazard quotients up from 6 to 38, where anything over 1 is unacceptable. It should do so as well for the plumes that are affecting the youth camp, and it should do so for those that are impacting Clark's Marsh and the Au River. The time to act is now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna, like I said, we're over our time. I'm gonna go ahead and send it over to the RAB co-chairs for any closing comments. We will answer any questions or any comments that were not, we didn't get to today. I apologize for that, but they will be in the minutes as always. And I'll hand it over again to Dave and to Arnie for some closing comments.
Okay, I've asked Arnie to provide a list of topics that basically aren't related to PFAS because I can't do anything about PFAS until this RI is done. So, and if there's still any confusion about that, why I can't start a feasibility study and remedy today, we'll attempt to address this again at the next RAB. But right now, what other topics for the next RAB are there that the community RAB would like to hear about? So provide those to Arnie and he'll communicate them to me. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to follow up with that. I didn't know that was coming out quite that way, but I want to challenge all of the people on the line tonight to provide the community RAB and the RAB total a list of topics that you want to have clarified or additional ones for the next RAB. And I will commit that the community RAB will continue to work on many of these issues, which we've already communicated to the Air Force. I'd also like to add that I'd like to thank the Eagle for putting this on for us. I have wished I had requested a dress rehearsal so that we could kind of work through some of the things that have gone on, problem areas of chats versus questions and not everyone seeing it. So it was a great attempt and it was a good exercise to do. And I think that under the circumstances, it was well worth conducting, but in no way replaces face-to-face meetings and the quarterly schedule that was mentioned earlier. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and going back to the voting, I did not receive any comments or input on the matter, so we'll go ahead and address that in the future. That'll be something to address with the co-chairs between now and the following RAB. So for tonight, thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you so much for
Mr. Malcolm.
bearing with us. What's that?
Malcolm, this is Les with the Eagle. At some point during the meeting, there was a question about bringing DHHS and DNR back for their comments.
Well, their status update.
Oh, gotcha. Well, if you guys are okay with that, let's we'll go ahead and let them have their comment.
Good morning, good morning. Holy cow. Good evening, folks. This is Tammy Newcomb with Michigan DNR. Thanks for a little bit of time here. I'll just take a quick second with recent results that have been reported to the hunters who volunteered and gave us deer this last fall. There were about 18 deer that were given to us to test for PFAS in the muscle. Today, those folks were notified that all 18 of the samples were non-detect in the muscle tissue. So those were deer that were taken from the greater outside of the Clarks Marsh area. APHIS was able to successfully complete the additional sampling that needed to get done. So we've got 20 deer from within Clarks Marsh. We've got the 40 deer from the greater Clarks Marsh area. Unfortunately, our labs are closed right now, so we can't do any of the disease testing to get those deer in for PFAS testing. So as soon as the DNR lab opens up, the heads and tissues will be sent to the lab for CWD testing and bovine tuberculosis testing first, and then on to the DHHS lab for PFAS testing. And again, our goal is to have all of that information pulled together in time for DHHS to have a time to do an analysis of those results for any potential changes, consumption advisory for deer in the fall. Over.
Okay, thank you.
Malcolm, could I just jump in one quick thing? We did not talk about action items, and when everyone was talking, they really never mentioned it, but there were a lot of great recommendations and great questions that really do need follow-up. So may I suggest that over the next few weeks, as we're reviewing the minutes, that we give opportunity for the RAB members or anyone else who made comments that should be an action item to submit a request that that question or action be added in that fashion.
Well, I captured 2 action items. The first was the status of the SS57 in situ anaerobic biodegradation system. And then the other one was information about Clarks Marsh. I think it was what contamination is there, I think. So those are the only 2 action items that came up during the RAB. There's lots of questions, but I didn't hear any other action items.
Well, let me turn my question into an action item regarding the definition of interim mitigation actions in accordance with the Air Force Instructional Manual 32/7020. I'd like a written clarification on that versus, and I know you're in a tough place that you can't spend money where your bosses won't allow you to, but there's a disconnect in CERCLA definitions that's causing us a huge problem and has for years.
Maybe you could send an email to PA, to the facilitator, to articulate your question about the regulations and interim actions.
Well, I want to throw it in as an action item. We can deal with it that way. But if there are any others, there was a lot of great discussion here, and I think that there are some additional action items. We just have not been good at stating this is an action item, you know, when people are talking. So if we could have a week or two for people to think and to submit in writing to the facilitator to think about those action items. That's my suggestion.
Excuse me, this is Kathy Woosterbarth. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I understand that there were multiple comments, people trying to place public comments, and they tried to submit them or to speak, but they were ignored. Do we know why that was? Or how, does anyone have any insight on what happened there?
Well, I can assure you nobody was ignored. If we missed anything, that was a just technical error or a mistake. But like I said, all these comments and questions are captured and we will address them in the minutes. That's.
Malcolm, could I ask, can the Eagle Jim that's handling the webinar, is there a survey or evaluation of a webinar form that they already have that people could submit so that these can be eliminated for any future time that we're going to use it? Or at least document that something happened, as Kathy has heard.
I'm not understanding. I guess if there's a comment or suggestions, you could always submit those to us. Is that what you're?
No, I'm asking actually the State Eagle
Okay.
webinars. You got a survey or a evaluation on his system that could be provided to everyone that's on here.
Arnie, we can follow. This is Beth. We can follow up with that.
Okay.
I'll talk to Jim and I'll get back to you if that's possible.
And I apologize, one more interruption from Kathy Woosterberg. We had mentioned some action items and one of the muted panelists is suggesting Bob Taser, who was muted early in the meeting for some reason. He is suggesting that Congressman Kildee's statement about the intent of the 13.5 million should be an action item.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, Kathy.
Oh, I think even the congressman even stated that he's following it up. So that means we need to follow it or track it also.
I think it's more important that the Air Force follow it and track it.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. The Air Force added as an official action item to the RAB meeting.
It could also be used to temper Mr. Gibson's statement just before we went into closing comments.
Dave, this is Mike Neller from Eagle. You have a response to that? I mean, do you have an issue with making that an action item or not?
No, I've looked at what the response will be. I'm looking at the Secretary of the Air Force's letter, so it could be an action item.
Okay, all right.
All righty. Thank you so much for being here. Again, we have everything recorded. We will address everything the best we can. All the comments, all the questions, stuff we didn't get to. Again, we apologize if there were some mutings and unmutings and things that didn't happen accordingly. But we thank you once again for being here and being part of the meeting. Thank you very much. Good night.
And when will it be released for people to see this recording?
I would say that first you've got to get through the minutes and get all the RAB members, community, and governmental entities, their comments back on the minutes, and before we release the recording.
I'd like to rethink that for specific reasons, because we have had live broadcasts and it's been available that same evening as a video recording. So at least the video and audio part, I think, could be released. Maybe the question portion would need your further review before maybe do something like that. I don't know, or the whole thing.
I'll get with Public Affairs and we'll come up with a time frame to release the recording.
The community RAB does in fact use the recording to ensure that the minutes are complete?
Could you repeat that question?
It was a statement of the community RAB procedures. We generally review the minutes and the recording simultaneously to ensure that things are not omitted. And, you know, it's just a double check on what goes on.
Yeah, and actually, the community RAB has a work session 2 weeks after the RAB meeting to go over what we heard, what we found, prioritize issues, and we used the video recording for the last year and a half to do that. So I suggest that we have a conversation, the co-chairs, next week to at least talk about that aspect of the recording that was made by the go-to meeting, to see if we can have at least that part released to us long before the minutes come out.
Yes, we can have that discussion next week.
Okay.
Excuse me, this is Jeff again. A quick question, if I may. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Hi. It's been asked, and I'm curious also, is there a time frame for the next RAB meeting? Have you, I know that this one's not over yet, but is there a plan to have another one this year?
That's why I was asking for the topics that are of interest to the RAB members, again, that aren't related to PFAS. I really don't know any more topics to give before November that'll be useful data to the RAB until that time frame. And so barring, just to go over this information again, if there's non-PFAS related information that you'd like to have a RAB meeting, then let Arnie know. And then we can move toward what would be a good time to have that, have a RAB meeting to address those items.
I'd like to jump in and say, yes, there definitely are. And because we have not talked much in the last 2 years about non-PFAS, but there's PFAS issue too. So I guess next week we're going to have to talk about that. And I had submitted a written request that we notify a tentative June, so a quarterly, because that's always been the case, that we've talked about the next quarterly meeting at the end of a RAB meeting where we are right now. So at least put that on the table, pencil it in, and we'll submit topics by the agencies and the community RAB and see how it prioritizes to you.
The coming years, we're going to be easy to have quarterly meetings. There's going to be lots of things to talk about on a quarterly basis. So I'm not one to expend resources without having a good agenda to address.
Okay. Dave, this is Jeff again. I believe that if you wanted to schedule a RAB in June and have it specifically talk about the data already accumulated for Clark's Marsh and what is the surface water levels of PFAS and PFOA coming out of the 3 pipes and Clark's Marsh and all of the data that we have collected concurrently up until now, I bet you we could spend 3 hours talking about Clark's Marsh, and I would love to have that opportunity to see what you guys think about that.
I'll take that into consideration.
Okay, great.
David, the other thing you can think about is the action items that we have and the new ones. I think when you look at those, you're going to see there's a lot of discussion that we need to have and answers by the agencies, not just the Air Force, but also state agencies, but mostly the Air Force, to continue to act and close those out. So that could be almost a meeting in itself. And then we also got the election. I don't think many people want me to just continue for another 6 months without an election.
Well, before we put an election on the agenda again, either the facilitator or another member of the RAB community has to say, is there anyone else that wants to be the co-chair for the community? So I'm not going to put on the agenda again until I hear from RAB members they want to run to be the co-chair. Okay. So that's because what I keep hearing is, I mean, people keep asking the question. Nobody volunteers, nobody speaks up, whatever it is. So it won't be on the agenda until we have at least one other person who wants to run to be the co-chair. And basically, if we don't have it by June, Arnie's the co-chair for the next year. So, we'll so next June, the next RAB, if that's going to be June, if we don't hear about people wanting to be considered for the co-chair, then Arnie will be the co-chair for the next year, and it's over with. Appreciate everybody's participation and look forward to scheduling the next RAB and talking about important remediation work at Wurtsmith.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else for anybody. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for making this happen, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good job.
Thanks, Les and Jim.